our next panel will be very interesting because it's companies that are actually trying to tackle that challenge with technology. So we have Kittel Watson, the co-founder and lead software engineer at Giora, and Alina from Regrow, and the moderator for this panel is Ada, investment manager at Airtree. Welcome.
Thanks so much. Ooh, that's loud. So welcome everyone. I am very lucky to be joined by Elena and Kadel. I think as a quick intro, so I'm an investor at Airtree. We're a venture fund. We invest in startups as early as an idea and a person, and as late as the companies that we have today, such as Canva, Regrow, Bright, a bunch of others. And I'm thrilled because I think the intersection of climate, technology, data is just accelerating. And I have two great people who are on the ground actually seeing how this is being done. So I'll get into it. So I think the most interesting thing that I've seen from a macro level of Regrow and Giora is we actually have these different parts of the value chain. We have our growers, we have the carbon markets, we have the buyers as well as the financiers. And today on this panel we have people who are using technology bring together these really core parts and stakeholders into an integrated solution. So I'm not going to be able to do them justice. I'll actually hand over to let them talk about themselves and what they're working on.
Hi guys, Elena from Regrow Ag. I'm a project developer, a project manager, at Regrow. Regrow is really here to bring monitoring services, verification services and reporting services to agricultural lands specifically, and we're situated in carbon markets. We have been in the Australian market for the last 2-3 years, and we entered the Australian market when models or algorithms were able to be used in agricultural greenhouse gas quantification. So we're working in both the offsets and inset space in the carbon market, and working in both broad acre and pasture systems.
And for those in the audience who don't know the difference between offsetting and insetting, what's the best way to understand that?
So insetting is, as mentioned in the last panel, insetting is something that coals would potentially use to decarbonise their supply chain. So if they could produce, or their growers or the people that they buy from could produce a lower emissions meat product, then if they bought that, their whole emissions, greenhouse gas emissions would be lower. Offsetting is when they purchase a credit to reduce their emissions through a credit, so it's not within their supply chain.
Cool, yeah. So I'm Kadel, I'm the co-founder of Giora. So what we do is deliver green incentives within agriculture. So that's things like carbon insets and offsets. That's things like sustainability-linked loans. That's things like marketing campaigns, so you can prove that your sustainability and ESG claims are valid and that you're not greenwashing. We work all the way from the grower through to the end consumer. So generally our customers are people like food processors and retailers. Our users, the growers, provide the data that allows them to make those ESG claims, and we allow the food processors and retailers to then reward the growers for doing so.
Nice one. And so on greenwashing, it looks like there are two themes that seem to keep coming up when I look at the bottlenecks for this space. One is trust, and the second one is around the supply. I think trust has been definitely a topical area. We've seen with Intersekt come out with their, what do we call it? Their crackdown, shall we say, of greenwashing. And so I'm very keen to explore this a little bit deeper. Like, what have you seen with the various stakeholder groups that you engage in that is driving the key challenges around trust?
I'm happy to start. So I think maybe 10 years ago when people made a claim about sustainability, it was because they were a first mover and they really cared. But what we're seeing now is obviously the world catching up. It's becoming more business as usual, and there's a lot of money involved. And when that happens, kind of fraud, exaggeration will naturally follow. I think it's extremely important right now when we're on the precipice of making this a business as usual thing to reduce the reputational risk to the whole industry from fraudulent claims. Because if there's just one high profile case it casts doubt on everyone's actions. If I just make a claim, like anyone can make a claim about anything. I could say I've planted 1,000 trees in my backyard, issue me some carbon credits please and thank you, I'll sell them on the market. But a data point is useless without its social context. We need to know who is making the claim, how they have measured it, how certain they are about the measurement, when they made it, the methodologies and the principles that they used in finding that data. And so that's where I think technology can start to make its place in increasing trust through the supply chains.
Nice one. And when we look at the banks, for instance, what parts of those elements are they prioritizing the most, would you say?
Banks are, as we all know, very risk averse. And so now that they are really interested in both improving their own ESG portfolios and being able to issue innovative new green products, it's really about just proving that what the grower is saying they're doing is what they're really doing. So if they're introducing, say, a sustainability-linked loan, which for those who don't know is when we have a business as usual loan, so a standard business loan where there are certain sustainability KPIs, and if the farmer meets those KPIs, say by planting cover crops or by improving their on-farm practices, they get an interest rate reduction. So it's great for the farmer who gets the cheaper finance. It's great for the bank because they can prove their ESG impact. Obviously, if there is a disconnect between what the farmer's saying they're doing and what the satellite imagery is showing, the bank really wants to know about that and flag that so they can reduce the risk of their whole portfolio.
Makes sense. And this ties really nicely into what the previous panel were talking about, right? Which is how do you actually incentivize good and then reward good? And what about you, Elena?
I think another important area to look at when we're thinking about trust is being able to compare outputs with different outputs. So the way Regrow tries to tackle that is to make sure that we're either working under a protocol or a method, or where we're getting our technology certified by certification bodies such as Intersekt. They're a global emissions claims certification body. So yeah, that's sort of on top of making sure all the data that's being provided to us is also true. So yeah, we do that with remote sensing and stuff like that.
Nice. And you've also been doing a lot of work looking at international carbon markets and the things that we could learn here in Australia. What are some of the most interesting insights that you've found so far that we can take and roll with?
It's an interesting one because Australia actually has a really rigorous carbon market, and the rest of the world is actually learning from us. But the challenge with something that's very rigorous and is really making growers be able to actually access these types of programs, because the amount of data sometimes that they have to produce for these types of programs is really high in Australia, whereas the global carbon market has a bit more flexibility and it understands this, so it actually allows access to these types of programs and reductions of greenhouse gases. Yeah.
And then when we look at tech, sensors, satellite imagery, all the good things, blockchain, where do these technology tools sit in the way in which you enable and overcoming these challenges?
I could start with, I might start with Regrow's bread and butter, which is models. So we use models to reduce costs of projects. We use models to be able to scale projects. And another one is we use APIs, so that really allows farmers to easily interact with these types of programs.
And just to add on to that, a lot of people, when they hear about greenwashing and things like that, they think about the raw underlying data. Is this data correct? Is it from a verified source? That's all great. But the actual methodologies used to issue things like carbon insets and biodiversity credits are really complicated. And most of the time, they're backed by Excel spreadsheets, the most hated and loved technology in the world, I think. We've recently been working on a tool that can kind of take in a spreadsheet model and convert it into a more robust model backed by our data sources. And we've taken spreadsheets from academia, from individual companies, from industry bodies, and every single one has had at least one bug in it. So we are working with quite shaky foundations, and models like Regrow really help to improve that.
And how do you balance this? I guess sometimes it's a trade-off, right, between speed and accuracy. Like, what's the best way to think about making that trade-off and where to strike that balance?
It's a good question. Farmers and the agriculture industry in general are very time poor, especially if you're looking at harvest, where for a few weeks people are getting up before dawn, they're working till 10 p.m. at night on a tractor. So I think there's almost an asymmetry here where the people who benefit most from the data are not the ones who have to collect it. So when you're asking a farmer to then, get off the tractor after a day of work and start typing in things and, cross-checking numbers using Excel, it is an extreme ask without some form of reward. So as Regrow is doing and as we're doing, I think remote sensing, satellite imagery, integrations with on-farm machinery, these are all ways that we can kind of improve the speed and ease of data entry without sacrificing quality. And in fact, it can improve the quality because humans are good at many things, but we are quite poor at manual data entry.
That does bring around the thought that agriculture is infamously known as quite hard selling because, people are busy and they're on the field actually getting stuff done. Have there been kind of key learnings on the best way to bring farmers, growers on the journey to bring technology into their world?
One thing that springs to mind is whatever a grower is doing now, trying to take that data point and share it with everything that they're interacting with. So it might be an organics certification, it might be Regrow or one of us going into a carbon market, it might be for an audit. So I feel like there's large opportunity for data sharing amongst all of the requirements that they're faced with.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this data can be used for multiple purposes, right? So you have your Regrow model generating carbon credits. Great, we can pump this into your agronomy platform. We can start to give you recommendations about how to improve yield. We can send this data then to your insurance provider, and they'll say, oh, look, you're mitigating the risks of climate change. We're going to give you an improved premium. And so once you've kind of got that data in and you've got a backbone that can connect to other platforms, you can use it for a lot of really cool things.
So what I'm hearing is encouraging farmers to bring the data in so that you can make it as frictionless as possible to maximize the various different areas of their life that you can simplify through digitization, but really requiring that one kind of point of engagement to really help open up all those doors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the incentives really come in, like the direct financial incentives. It's a lot easier to say to a farmer, you'll get an interest rate reduction if you provide this data. Or we can look at, say, their NDVI satellite vegetation index, and we can say, look, there is $50,000 of biodiversity credits possibly issuable on your farm. And that's a much easier sell than saying, oh, maybe one day you'll prove to a consumer that your product was sustainable.
I would like to add that I think the ag tech industry is on top of this, and I think things like John Deere, farm management systems, they're getting bombarded with people like us saying, we know you have data, we don't want to go and ask the grower again because I know they're not going to like us. So yeah, can we do something about this? Can we share?
And how receptive have you found those larger organizations with that data to being on this journey of integration?
They're definitely getting demand from their growers, and they want to provide that as a service, as a pathway for their growers. If they don't, I think they're really going to be left behind, to be honest.
Nice one. That is very promising. So I've got a couple of questions for each of you. So Kate, you've worked with a whole variety of tools, ones that are more mainstream, also ones that are maybe a little more less mainstream. When you're building a product, how do you think about what the right tool is for the problem that you're solving?
I think the key thing is to pick the tool for the problem and not for the marketability of the tool. And the example that obviously comes to mind here is that we use blockchain at Giora. And 5 years ago, it was sort of like AI is now. You could sprinkle a blockchain on something and you could raise a ton of money, which is great. But blockchain for us is actually a really practical tool. It gives us this auditable, verifiable log of people's actions that are shared between people who don't necessarily trust each other. things like things like graph databases, again, which are another big kind of VC high-ticket item right now, but that allow you to do things like work out people's reputation in the system, flag different people as having different value when contributing data. All of these tools can be really useful, but a farmer does not care if you're using blockchain or if you're using a graph database. They care about the actual problem you're solving for them.
Nerding out a little bit on the technology a bit more, one of the challenges with blockchain and also the benefits is once you put it in, right, it's incredibly hard to change. How do you think about the balance of data that's flexible, because sometimes things go wrong and sometimes the data's wrong, right? And then also the immutability and the trust that comes with blockchain?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Especially in agriculture, I think people don't realize how privacy sensitive farmers are. You know, there's maps created by activists out there on the internet that mark different farms and say, you should protest this farm because they're doing X, Y, and Z, right? So it's a scary world for a lot of farmers to put this information online. We believe that the immutability of blockchain is extremely important for proving ESG credentials, ESG claims, but we start from a kind of private by default approach. So everything that goes on is encrypted or hashed. What that means is you can kind of prove to someone that you've put a value on the blockchain without exactly revealing to everyone what that value is. So it's useful for your counterparties and for no one else. From there, what we do is we set up something called a lens. And this is getting a bit technical, but it allows you to kind of share parts of your information with different interested parties. So you might have, say, a consumer lens that shows all the photos from your farm and shows you patting the happy cows and so on. But you might have a bank lens that you give to your loan manager that proves that you've planted your certain amount of cover crops. And so you can kind of selectively share that information and get the benefits of blockchain without having to, reveal the whole party.
Makes sense. I'd be very happy to see some happy cows. And Elena, RubyGrow has been doing some really interesting stuff with parties like AgriWise and some other really interesting integrations. What would you say is I think we've already touched on this, but what would you say is the role of integrations and what does that look like from a benefits on the ground perspective?
So yeah, sort of did touch on this, but I'll go over and there's one more thing to add. So for someone like AgriWeb, the integration is super useful because that's what their producers are asking for. They're turning to their farm management systems in some cases and saying, we want to enter a carbon market, we don't know how to. Or they're getting demand from a different angle and they say, well, I have the data here, how do I use it? For the grower, it's allowing an easier flow to the carbon market. They're not double handling their data. For someone like Regrow, it's actually providing some level of verification that data is true. So especially if it's coming from John Deere, which is not AgriWeb, but someone like John Deere who has machine-operated data that's going directly from what happened to the farm management system, we can take that directly and know that's very true data.
And this, I assume, ties back to this core product around the models and being able to bring these different data sets together and verifying and triangulating the data points.
Yeah, exactly. So we then ingest all that data into our model and then can report that with strong confidence to the regulators and registries.
That makes sense. I just got another question on the carbon markets, which reminds me, what do you think the international carbon markets can learn from Australia?
That's a good question. Maybe it's okay to be rigorous, especially with all the tech that's happening. I mean, Australia is investing a lot in the tech and how to make, especially the soil carbon credits more accessible. So yeah, maybe that it's okay to have a high rigor because there's companies and new tech coming that will make those methods really accessible.
And this comes back to maybe the trade-off between the speed and the accuracy actually starts to decline and get smaller and smaller, right? Yeah, that makes sense. All right, final question for you both, so I will stop interrogating you. Let's look into the future and the various interesting tech trends that are coming up. What are you most excited about for this space?
Sorry. I'm most excited about new technologies for privacy in this space. Obviously, I outlined the issues before, but especially when it comes to proving certain data points without revealing the underlying secret source. We have new technologies like zero-knowledge proofs, which allow you to kind of mathematically prove that, say, your soil carbon rating has improved by this much without revealing the underlying values. We also have technologies like differential privacy, which is great for comparison because a farmer can, say, prove that they are in the top 5% of most sustainable suppliers for Woolworths without directly identifying themselves or any of those other growers. So you can kind of mathematically prove that. And I'm excited to see how these get applied beyond academia and into real-world products.
And how long do you think that is away?
I mean, people are doing kind of small-scale work on it. We've integrated some zero-knowledge proofs into our platform. But it's still quite costly. There still needs to be developments in actually making it user-friendly for developers. Within the next 10 years, I think it could go quite big.
Nice one.
I think I'm most excited to see the expansion of APIs, to be honest. Expansion to the registries, expansion across everyone else in that that carbon ecosystem or agricultural ecosystem, the banks, people like this. I think it's just going to accelerate the space a lot and again, bring more trust. And one other thing I've got on my radar is innovations in food waste. I see that popping up a little bit now, and it's been worked on for many years, but yeah, definitely seeing it more at the forefront. So yeah.
Awesome. Looks like we've almost run out of time. I will open it up to the audience. Any questions? Otherwise, I will continue to bombard them with mine. Yes.
I have such a vested interest here, sorry, not in the law, but I'm really interested where the AIDA is of like investment standpoint. If you're talking to a group of people obviously care about this, what parts of this tech stack would you kind of call for more engagement or investment in? Like where are you seeing gaps and where can we all kind of be more proactive in participating in building this tech stack?
Good question. So I'll play that back. Correct if I get it wrong. It's what parts of the stack do we think could do with more investment and attention in building impactful solutions in this space? I'll start with a macro perspective of where I see the opportunities. I think that there's the stock of carbon in the atmosphere, and the various innovations that are coming to pull that, to reduce that stock of carbon. And then I think about it in terms of the flow of carbon. So of the various businesses emitting the flow of carbon into the atmosphere, how do we actually reduce that flow or even stop it? I think all areas are important, and there are different types of money that are best suited for different types of solutions. And so I think the ones that really move the dial naturally are the ones that are more hardware-based, deep tech, heavy industry. Like if we look at concrete, if we look at those really like property, energy, these are the real big buckets, right? Transport that drive emissions. So naturally, I see a lot of the more like private equity, capital-intensive, willing investors paying more attention, like your BlackRocks, et cetera, and also needing to pay increasing attention into this space. I think venture has a really interesting role in that venture knows how to scale businesses at a specific pace incredibly fast and at a global scale. And so I think there are specific types of businesses that are suited for that path. They tend to be more software orientated for at least your generalist VCs like Airtree. And then we have a bunch of resources and platforms and also data to help guide those types of startups on that specific scale path. And then there are like your players that are in that kind of middle. You've got your growth equity, you've got your main sequences, for instance, that have the longer time horizon. And they fill, I think, a really important gap of the types of technologies that may be more of a blend of hardware, software, maybe even more hardware specific, that have like longer time horizons and like don't grow as fast as venture scalable to like this specific type of venture scalable, but can be a really critical, play a really critical role in helping businesses still scale at a decent speed. And I think one of the insights I've had, I don't know if we call it an insight, but something I've been thinking about is when we think about venture, there's a nice alignment in that climate is an incredibly time critical problem, and venture is something that is particularly good at doing things very quickly. And there's a nice alignment there. That's my little 2 cents. Thank you for the great question. What about you guys? What do you think? Where do you think investment and also attention is best spent to really move the dial in the space?
I would probably add on to what Eleanor said before about APIs and remote sensing. The less that the farmer has to do in agriculture, the better. It's an industry that contributes quite a significant proportion of global emissions and global climate change impact. I would love to see ways to quantify things like biodiversity without having to go to the site and do a field survey of the animals and birds you see, for example. Find lower cost ways to do that so that we can identify the areas that need to improve the most.
I would say, unfortunately, in some cases, especially for models, we do need real tangible data. So investment to getting that data so then we can set up the model is super useful.
We love data. If you haven't all picked up, we love our data. And on that note, I will wrap up. Thank you both so much for spending this time with me and with us.